Okay, so tonight we're talking about Alexander the Great. And one of the first things I want to talk about is the sources that we get a lot of the stuff from Alexander are somewhat questionable. I mean, we do know that Alexander did conquer most of the known world, and we'll get to that in a second. But basically, Alexander had a historian that basically kept a diary. It was called the Royal Diary, and another one called the Deeds of Alexander. And so he was hired by Alexander to keep records. This guy's name was Callisthenes. You don't need to memorize the names or anything, but I'm giving them to you just so you can kind of hear the progression. So first you had Callisthenes with him. All of his materials are lost, so then it turned to secondary authors that got their information from Callisthenes. These guys are Clitarchus and Ptolemy, and they write about Alexander, but then all of that material is also lost. So then their works were recreated by Diodorus of Sicily, Curtius Rufus, Arrian, and Plutarch. So those are the people we're getting the information from Alexander from, even though they weren't really with Alexander as things were taking place. All right, so into our notes then. I would suggest taking your notes on a separate sheet here today. There's not going to be enough room for your chart, so that's probably the best thing you can do. Okay, so our story starts before Alexander is around, and we're talking about Philip II. So we have Philip, who is down here, you can see. And in Macedonia, you had a kingdom here that was ruled by Philip II, which is north of Greece. And, the Macedonians always kind of wanted to be Greek, but the Greeks viewed the Macedonians as barbaric, as they viewed just about everybody else. And so they're really looked down upon by the Greeks. But Philip was going to do something about that. He was the king in 359 BC. He was a brilliant general, and he started a new technology that would be used, and that is the Greek Phalanx, or a larger version of the Phalanx. Okay, so here it is. You basically have a 16 by 16 Phalanx, so you got more people involved. And you have lighter shields, but at the same time you are carrying a huge sarissa, okay, or a very long spear. And this is going to move a lot quicker than the previous phalanx, and it's going to be quite sufficient. We'll take a look at this in action a little bit in class tomorrow. Okay, so back to the Macedonian Conquest, though. Greece is going to be invaded, and Greece at this point is extremely disorganized before the invasion. You have the remnants of the Peloponnesian War going on. You also have this issue with democracy, people not being united and taking a long time to get anything really done. So the Macedonians are going to invade. Philip is in charge and basically takes over. And one of the things he did was he allowed the governments in these local regions to continue to work, but now they were controlled by Philip. So kind of like the Persians in what they did as they conquered. However, in 336 BC, Philip is assassinated at his own daughter's wedding. So this allows for a very young Alexander, about 20 years old, and he is going to proclaim himself king. So a little bit of background about Alexander. I mentioned earlier he was tutored by Alexander. He was also training from a very young age. Now he was also involved in his teens with his father, so they really invaded Greece together. So kind of a nice little father-son bonding moment. And one of the things Alexander did, he idolized Achilles. So he was well read, again tutored by Aristotle, but he wanted to be like Achilles in his style of warfare and his leadership. But when he became the king, again at 20 years old, the Greeks viewed this as an opportunity to take down a weak ruler. So they rebelled in Thebes. But Alexander's going to prove sufficient, and he ended up killing about 6,000 and enslaved many others. Okay, so this really put an end to Greece's ideas of rebelling against Alexander. So at this very point, he is proving to the Greeks that he was very strong. Now, his next goal was then to go ahead and try to conquer Persia. So with this, he was going to need more than just Macedonians. So he eventually is going to get these Greeks on his side, and basically they're going to be fighting for him. So Alexander will invade Persia. Okay, so I'm going to highlight a few of the battles that are going to take place for Alexander. The first one being the Battle of Granicus. So with this, basically Alexander, as you can see over here, he is going to enter Asia and enter the Persian Empire the same way that Xerxes crossed this bridge made of boats. He's going to do the same and invade. And the first real battle is going to take place here with the Persians. He leads 35,000 people into Asia Minor, met with 40,000 Persians at this battle. Alexander is going to be successful, and he's going to move on. So he's going to march on. You can see this red line. This is the route that he's going to take. And eventually, he's going to be met with Darius III at this point. He vows to crush Alexander, and he raises up this very large army of about 50 to 75,000 men. So Alexander is outnumbered at this point, and Alexander is going to charge anyways. So basically, Darius is going to run from him at this point and retreat. At the same point, he wants to try to negotiate with Alexander. But at this point, he is now into this region, and Alexander has conquered, a decent amount already. Darius tries to negotiate and offer him peace, but Alexander says, no, to heck with it. I'm going to try to conquer all of the Persian Empire. But before he continues on to the major points in the Persian Empire, he's going to go to Greece. He's going to go to Egypt first. So he heads to Egypt, and Egypt is actually quite thrilled to see Alexander. He is going, the Egyptians are going to view Alexander as a liberator, because the Egyptians never really liked being in control by the Persians. So this takes place. It becomes, part of Alexander's territory. Alexander is actually crowned pharaoh, and the wonderful city of Alexandria is built. Okay, so after Alexander is able to build up his army a little bit more, still not quite that much, he's going to return to this idea of conquering Persia. So he actually goes out here first, visits an oracle of some kind, and that advises him to move on, carry on, and defeat the Persians. So he goes back, and then right up in here, kind of near the ancient city of Nineveh. But this is the Battle of Gaugamela, and I'll write these out there for you so you can see what these battles are called. Okay, so the Battle of Gaugamela for Darius is really his plan to just completely destroy Alexander. He builds an army of about 250,000, and he's got chariots. He's got these knives on the chariots. We'll talk about these. These are scythed chariots. Maybe I'll show you an image tomorrow of this. And the Battle of Gaugamela takes place, but Alexander once again proves that he is stronger than Darius and has better battle tactics. We'll kind of look at some of these tomorrow as well. But the defeat here for the Persians is the end, really. It ends Persian power, although you can see there's a lot more to conquer. Alexander is now going to move on to Babylon. Oops, excuse me. Moving the wrong thing here. Move on to Babylon. Doesn't have to fight there to take control of it. Moves in, takes over Susa, and Persepolis. They are now his. Okay, but first of all, he wanted to capture Darius, because Darius is still alive, just running like a coward. So he heads up this way, and eventually Darius is found dead there. One of Alexander's men actually killed him, and Alexander was not happy about that. He either wanted to kill him or at least befriend him and kind of have this idea of peace amongst them once he was conquered. So Alexander had this guy killed for killing Darius. Then Alexander's going to continue moving east and kind of wander all around, be the founder of other Alexandrias around this region. But then he's going to hit up his last battle, and that's going to take place right here. And that's the Battle of Hydaspes River. So now Alexander is in the Indus Valley, where he is met with a powerful Indian army. Although the Indians are powerful at this point, he is going to win. He wins a major battle. This is the one where he would be fighting against war elephants and this type of thing. But at the end of this battle, morale is extremely low amongst his men, and they have traveled for 11 years. They've traveled about 11,000 miles, and reluctantly Alexander is forced to turn back. So they basically head down here, and then they're going to head back towards Greece. I mean, these people have never, they haven't been home. And now Alexander didn't want this. He did not want to go back all the way home. He had plans to conquer Arabia, and then he also really had plans to make it all the way to the Pacific. But in 323, Alexander dies on the way back. There's a number of different things out there. Maybe he was killed. Maybe he was poisoned or something like this. But ultimately, the empire is going to be divided once he dies. Okay, so here's pretty much the breakdown. You have basically Macedonia and Greece kind of controlled by one of Alexander's generals. You have Ptolemy in Egypt. So this starts a new, really, dynasty in Egypt, the Ptolemaic kingdom. So Ptolemy actually becomes the pharaoh there. Then you have Seleucus, which is he's going to control most of what the Persian Empire was. And you might remember him because he's the one that ends up fighting the Mauryaans as they establish their empire, and he loses. So really this becomes, the end of this empire. Now, one of the big things, probably the most significant aspects of Alexander and what he did, as he was expanding the empire, he created a new culture, a culture that was going to last beyond his years, beyond, even beyond the Roman Empire. And that's Hellenistic culture. Okay, Hellenic culture is Greek culture. Hellenistic is the blending of Greek, Egyptian, and Indian. You can even throw in, Persian in that as well. So it's the blending of culture that takes place throughout this region. Okay, so I threw that up there. Definitely want to write that down. Hellenistic culture being probably the most significant contribution that Alexander has. The other thing, kind of to come back to Greece and kind of wrap that up, it's really the end of independent Greece. Okay, it is no longer independent because, again, it's controlled really by Macedonians, and then in just a little bit, the Romans are going to be taking it over. So that's all for today. Hopefully you enjoyed Alexander. We will talk about him more tomorrow. We'll look at some of the things that he did technologically with his military. We might watch a couple video clips, and then we'll be on into Rome.